Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers has remained a classic for a simple reason. It speaks directly to one of the most common human struggles. We wait too long to live because we are waiting to feel unafraid. We tell ourselves that once we are more confident, more certain, more prepared, more emotionally secure, then we will finally make the decision, speak up, change direction, ask for what we want, leave what is not working, or step toward the life that feels truer. But the longer that waiting continues, the more we begin to organize life around fear instead of possibility. Susan Jeffers challenges that entire pattern. Her core message is not that fear can be removed from life forever. It is that fear is part of life, especially part of any life that is growing. The real issue, then, is not how to avoid fear, but how to stop treating fear as the authority over our choices. That is what gives the book its enduring power. It is not selling a fantasy of permanent calm. It is teaching a different relationship to uncertainty. It says that fear is natural, but paralysis is optional. It says that confidence is not a prerequisite for action. Confidence is often the result of action. It says that personal power does not come from making life perfectly safe. It comes from trusting that you can handle life even when it is not safe, not certain, and not fully under your control. That shift changes everything. It turns fear from a stop sign into a companion. Sometimes an uncomfortable companion, but no longer the driver. And once that happens, life begins to open. Not because fear disappears, but because you stop surrendering your future to it. One of the strongest things Jeffers does in this book is normalize fear. Many people believe that if they were stronger, more mature, or more capable, they would not feel so anxious about change, rejection, decisions, conflict, or the unknown. But Jeffers insists that fear is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of being alive. Whenever we move beyond what is familiar, we feel exposed. Whenever we care about an outcome, we risk disappointment. Whenever we make a choice, we give up the certainty of not choosing. Fear is built into that territory. The real problem is not fear itself. The real problem is the meaning we assign to fear. We interpret it as proof that we should not proceed. We imagine that discomfort means danger, that uncertainty means mistake, or that anxiety means we are not ready. Jeffers wants to break that chain. Fear does not always mean stop. Often it means you are approaching something important. Often it means growth is near. Once that becomes clear, fear loses some of its power. You no longer have to ask, how do I become the kind of person who never feels afraid? You can begin asking, how do I become the kind of person who acts wisely even while afraid? That is a much more practical question, and it is one the whole book is trying to answer. Jeffers is not trying to create fearless people. She is trying to create capable people. People who can feel fear without surrendering to it. People who can move forward before certainty arrives. People who trust themselves enough not to make comfort their highest value. Jeffers shows that fear becomes especially destructive when it begins shaping the boundaries of a person's life. Many people do not notice this happening at first. They think they are simply being careful, practical, realistic, or patient. But over time, the pattern becomes clear. They avoid difficult conversations because they fear conflict. They stay in the wrong job because they fear instability. They do not ask for more because they fear rejection. They avoid new relationships because they fear being hurt. They postpone decisions because they fear making the wrong one. They silence themselves because they fear embarrassment. Each single avoidance can seem reasonable in the moment, but together they slowly produce a life that is narrower than it could be. Jeffers wants the reader to see that the cost of fear is not only emotional. It is existential. Fear does not just make us uncomfortable. It can make us absent from our own lives. This is why her message is so energizing. She is not merely saying, be brave. She is saying, notice what fear is costing you. Notice the opportunities not taken, the truth not spoken, the strength not developed, the freedom not claimed. Then ask whether the temporary relief of avoidance is worth the long-term price of self-betrayal. This part of the book is powerful because it reframes courage not as heroic spectacle, but as daily participation in your own life. Courage is applying for the job. Courage is having the conversation. Courage is ending what must end. Courage is beginning what must begin. Courage is deciding that the discomfort of movement is healthier than the pain of stagnation. Jeffers wants people to understand that safety purchased through endless avoidance is rarely real safety. More often, it is a slowly shrinking cage. A central psychological move in Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway is the shift from trying to control life to learning how to trust yourself within life. Many fears are intensified by a hidden demand for guarantees. We want certainty that the decision will be right, the relationship will last, the risk will work out, the effort will pay off, and the pain will be manageable. But life does not offer that kind of advanced security. If we insist on having it before we act, we often remain stuck. Jeffers's answer is not to become reckless or indifferent. It is to relocate the source of safety. Instead of saying, "I will be okay only if everything goes as planned," she wants the reader to say, "I will be okay because I can handle whatever happens next." This is one of the deepest teachings in the book. It transforms confidence from outcome control into self-trust. It says that maturity is not the elimination of uncertainty. It is the strengthening of the self that faces uncertainty. Once that shift begins, the whole emotional landscape changes. Rejection becomes painful, but not annihilating. Mistakes become disappointing, but not identity-destroying. Change becomes unsettling, but not unbearable. The person begins to feel stronger because their stability no longer depends entirely on life going smoothly. This is the real source of power in Jeffers's framework. Power does not come from forcing the world to cooperate. Power comes from knowing you can remain standing, learning, adapting, and moving even when the world does not cooperate. This is what allows fear to loosen its grip. Fear feeds on helplessness. Self-trust interrupts helplessness. The more you know that you can survive discomfort, the less frightening discomfort becomes. Jeffers is especially insightful when she looks beneath obvious fears and asks what they are really made of. On the surface, people fear public speaking, being alone, changing careers, asking for a raise, making the wrong choice, confronting someone, or taking a risk. But underneath those surface fears are deeper fears: rejection, failure, disapproval, loss, helplessness. And beneath even those, Jeffers identifies the most basic fear of all, the fear that says, "I can't handle it." This is a powerful insight because it simplifies the problem. If many fears are really different expressions of the same deeper insecurity, then the real work is not to eliminate every surface fear one by one. The real work is to strengthen the part of you that doubts its own capacity. Once you begin to believe, "I can handle this, even if it is difficult," many fears start losing intensity. They may still show up, but they no longer feel all-powerful. This idea also creates compassion. People often judge themselves harshly for having so many fears, so much hesitation, so much inner resistance. But Jeffers suggests that much of this complexity comes back to one central wound: not trusting our ability to meet life. That means the path forward is not self-criticism. It is self-strengthening. Build evidence. Take small risks. Survive discomfort. Tell yourself the truth. Learn from what hurts. Over time, the sentence "I can't handle it" weakens, and a more powerful sentence begins to take its place. I may not control everything, but I can handle what comes. Another major lesson in the book is that fear grows when the mind repeatedly tells stories of helplessness. Jeffers understands that the emotional experience of fear is amplified by internal language. A person is not only afraid of the event. They're afraid of what they imagine the event will mean. They picture humiliation, abandonment, failure, disaster, rejection, shame, or permanent damage. That inner narration makes fear feel absolute. The body reacts not only to what is happening, but to what the mind predicts. Jeffers, therefore, puts great emphasis on inner dialogue. She wants the reader to notice how often they are speaking to themselves in ways that weaken rather than steady them. Thoughts like, "I will fall apart, I won't survive this, this would be too awful, I am not enough for this," all create a mental atmosphere where fear thrives. Her answer is not blind positivity. It is stronger truth. Remind yourself that discomfort is survivable. Remind yourself that mistakes are not the end. Remind yourself that growth often feels shaky at first. Remind yourself that not getting what you want does not mean you are broken. This matters because courage is not only behavioral. It is cognitive. The way you speak to yourself either tightens the grip of fear or loosens it. Jeffers wants people to become active participants in shaping that inner conversation, because a stronger mind creates a stronger life. Fear often becomes most intense around decisions. Jeffers sees that many people suffer not because they are unable to choose, but because they are demanding impossible certainty before choosing. They want to know that the path will be right, that nothing painful will result, that they will never regret it, and that the future will validate them completely. But decisions do not work that way. Every real choice involves unknowns. Every meaningful direction contains risk. And sometimes what makes a decision feel unbearable is not the decision itself, but the belief that one wrong move will ruin everything. Jeffers challenges that belief. She suggests that much of the suffering around decisions comes from perfectionism and from a lack of trust in our ability to handle consequences. If you know you can adapt, then a decision does not need to carry the weight of total life or death certainty. It can be a human choice made with the best awareness available now. This is deeply freeing. It means that living well is not about making only flawless decisions. It is about making thoughtful decisions and then living them with courage, flexibility, and responsibility. Jeffers also points toward the emotional maturity of accepting that no path is free of challenge. Not choosing has consequences too. Staying still is also a decision. The attempt to avoid risk often creates its own hidden damage. Once people understand that, they may become more willing to choose imperfectly and live forward rather than waiting forever. Decision-making then becomes less about certainty and more about self-trust. You do the best you can, you respond to what unfolds, and you stop requiring life to remove all ambiguity before you begin. One of the strongest emotional currents in Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway is its movement away from helplessness. Jeffers does not deny that people are hurt, limited, frightened, or influenced by their past. But she keeps directing the reader toward responsibility, because responsibility restores power. When fear dominates, people often start experiencing themselves as passengers in their own lives. Everything seems to happen to them. Other people decide their emotional state. Future uncertainty decides their level of peace. Old wounds decide what they can attempt. Responsibility interrupts that drift. It says that while you may not control everything, you are not powerless in how you participate. You can choose your next step. You can choose whether to speak or remain silent. You can choose whether to believe your most frightened thought. You can choose whether to keep hiding or begin practicing courage. This is not harshness. It is liberation. Jeffers wants people to recognize that reclaiming agency often begins with small acts of self-responsibility. Not waiting to be rescued. Not waiting to feel perfect. Not blaming fear for all inaction. But asking, what is my next honest move? That question is powerful because it is actionable. It returns the person to the present. And in the present, fear becomes more workable because action becomes possible. A great deal of fear is connected to approval. People fear rejection not only because rejection hurts, but because they have made acceptance a measure of worth. They fear criticism because criticism feels like exposure. They fear saying no because displeasing others feels dangerous. Jeffers sees this clearly. Much of what keeps people trapped is not the practical consequence of events, but the emotional consequence of interpreting events as proof of unworthiness. This is why strengthening self-worth matters so much in the book. When a person's value depends entirely on being liked, chosen, praised, or agreed with, fear becomes enormous. Every encounter feels high stakes. But when worth is grounded more deeply, the emotional climate changes. You can tolerate another person's disapproval. You can survive a no. You can make choices others may not understand. You can stop performing constantly for acceptance. Jeffers wants readers to build that kind of inner base. Not through arrogance, but through steadiness. The more rooted you are in your own value, the less terrifying life becomes. You stop treating ordinary disappointments as proof that you are nothing. And once that happens, many forms of fear start to weaken because they no longer have such a devastating story attached to them. Perhaps the most practical and memorable lesson in the whole book is that confidence is built through action, not before action. This matters because many people have the sequence reversed. They think first, I must feel ready, then I will act. Jeffers argues that readiness often comes after movement. You do not become confident by thinking about courage forever. You become confident by practicing courage. You take the step. You survive the discomfort. You discover that you are still standing. Then your self-image begins to change. Every act of facing fear creates evidence. It tells the nervous system and the mind, I can do difficult things. I can survive uncertainty. I can recover from awkwardness. I can handle rejection. That evidence matters more than motivation speeches and more than abstract intention. This is why Jeffers keeps bringing the reader back to doing. Fear shrinks when life gives you repeated proof that your feared collapse does not define the whole story. Action does not always feel good at first. In fact, it often feels messy, exposed, and uncomfortable. But over time, it creates a level of freedom that avoidance never can. Avoidance makes fear seem wise. Action tests whether fear is telling the truth. Very often, action reveals that fear has been exaggerating your fragility all along. Underneath all the techniques and psychological insights in the book, there is a broader philosophy. Jeffers is encouraging a stance of openness toward life. Not naive openness, not denial of pain, but a deeper willingness to participate. Fear tends to contract life. It says no too quickly. It protects, delays, avoids, defends. Jeffers is trying to create a person who can say yes more often. Yes to growth. Yes to uncertainty. Yes to learning. Yes to risk. Yes to the possibility that life can be richer than the version fear has prescribed. This is what gives the book its hopeful quality. It is not only about reducing anxiety. It is about enlarging aliveness. When you stop demanding perfect safety before you move, more of life becomes available to you. More relationships, more choices, more creativity, more self-respect, more expansion. The point is not to chase discomfort for its own sake. The point is to stop sacrificing your deepest possibilities in order to avoid temporary fear. That is a profound exchange, and Jeffers wants readers to make it. In the end, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway leaves us with a message that is both simple and life-changing. Fear will come. It will come when you grow, when you love, when you choose, when you speak honestly, when you fail, when you begin again, and when you leave behind what is too small for you. The goal is not to become someone to whom fear never speaks. The goal is to become someone who no longer obeys fear automatically. Susan Jeffers invites us to shift from helplessness to self-trust, from avoidance to participation, from perfectionism to courageous movement, and from the demand for guarantees to the practice of inner strength. What matters is not whether you can eliminate all uncertainty. What matters is whether you can learn to meet uncertainty with a steadier self. Once you understand that, the whole emotional terrain changes. You stop waiting for life to feel safe enough. You begin making yourself strong enough. And that may be the deepest promise of this book. Not that fear will disappear, but that your life can become larger than it.